Hey gang, my review today of the Boker Kwaiken. I've taken a bit of extra time with this one because I've gone through my ups and downs while I've been using it. I'll go through what the knife is basically. So it is a everyday carry type flipping knife. It's very much towards the stylized side of things, as you can probably see from just the general appearance of it. Whole knife blade disappears into the handle, sort of going for a very sort of sleek and slim little package to varying degrees of success. So what do you get? You get two titanium scales on each side, right? So then you get them over. So that's Cedric drinking, like he decides to drink as soon as I start filming. Anyway, you get so two titanium scales over two full stainless steel liners, and then you get a titanium back spacer here. You get a sort of mid carry, I would even almost say shallow carry pocket clip, and then of course you get a flipper launching VG10 Kwaiken style blade, so almost a trailing point. I think the point actually does end up a little bit higher than the spine of the knife, like the spine of the handle at the very least. So trailing point blade made of VG10 in a hollow grind. The knife is launched on IKBS bearings, which is loose bearings inside like a little track. Just something to be mindful of if you ever think of taking this one apart. Frankly, I would recommend never doing that, but you know, I'm sure it's possible. Watch all Nick Shabazz's tutorials for how, if you really are keen. But anyway, it's a 110 gram knife, and it is, well, rather than me rattling off specs, which I will show on a card at the end, let's do some size comparisons. First of all, let's compare it to the Kaiser T1. There we are. So you see it is a little bit the same size as the Kaiser T1, but got sort of less meat on it, so to speak. Let's look at it next to the Lion Steel SR11, which is a bigger knife to be sure, bigger in all dimensions and weighs an extra 40 grams or so on the Boker. Let's look at it next to an Open L number 8. We've all got a rough idea of the size of that one. You see it's pretty much the same size as the Open L's number 8 pocket knife, which is possibly their most popular sort of everyday carry type model. Compare those blade thicknesses there as well. Yes. Let's see, next to the Spyderco Spidey Chef. This knife weighs the same as the Boker Kwaiken. And you get a little bit more of everything, I must admit, and you even still get quite a nice stylized package, but you pay a fair bit more for the LC200N steel. This is also a titanium handled knife. Another sort of flashy little knife, the CRKT Pilar. There's all stainless steel construction. This weighs about 140 grams. Cold Steel American Lawman, which is about the same size again, same weight again as the Boker. Again, a fair bit more capabilities there, I would suggest. And then lastly, because I've got one purely for size comparison, let's put a Spyderco Delica underneath that there. Again, very similar sizing, if not the same size. Oh, and you know what? Look, it's a Wee Knives 620J on loan for review, so to look forward to there. So that's the rough idea of the size in general. Let's look at the blade next to the Spyderco Delica, shall we? Alright, so you see these two blades together, quite different. One, the Boker one, you can see the light catching on the inside of the grind there, that's a hollow grind, and this was a full flat grind on the Delica. Both are about the same thickness behind the edge, however the Delica keeps its thinness for much longer before eventually just reaching its final thickness at the top. The Boker quite quickly cascades its thickness up through this slope to this quite heavy shoulder here. In looking at the blade stocks next to one another, you're going to see a fair bit of difference there, which probably does explain the roughly 40 gram weight difference between these two knives. So you've got a much thinner blade, and then you've got a more or less entirely plastic handle apart from a bit of steel used for the backlock. So there you go. You get a, I think I've said, a pocket clip which carries, you know, moderately well, quite short. So that's the basic rough idea of what this knife is and how big it is. Let's talk about what I like and what I do not like about the knife. Alright, so what I like the appearance of it massively. I think it's an amazing looking knife, and it's a really excellent design by Lucas Burnley. In fact, it's been ate so many times by so many sort of Chinese manufacturers, and just the knockoff companies, such as I guess Quartermaster has done a Kwaiken with a Q. Yeah, it's more or less the same design. It is a really excellent modern sort of design, very much based still on a traditional sort of pattern. So he's done a couple of flourishes here, which I really like. I like this extra little bit of scalloping here. The blade looks really cool, and the flipper is so small, but yet it flips so well in company with the IKBS, of course. It really does get the knife out every time. When I first got it, mind you, it was a little bit gritty. I had to blast it out with WD-40, get all of whatever crud was in there, and then just re-oil it, and it has been absolutely fine since then. So yeah, I really like the looks and just the general design of it. I like this little end nook here, this little point that it comes to. I don't think there's any real use to it apart from just looking really good. The lanyard hole going through there, nice and subtle, very cool little knife. So in terms of appearance, it is definitely one of the better looking knives going, I would argue. I mean, it's always a matter of taste, but in my opinion, very nice looking little blade. The other things I do like about the knife, I do like the rough ergonomics of it. Like, I think overall I like knives with very simple handles for small use, for everyday carry use. When you're just taking it out to a few cuts at a time, I think having a nice little straight handle like this is a very good choice. The clip is low profile, so it doesn't cause any hot spots. The titanium is rounded over, and it's very nice. The blade has lots of belly and is a good cutting performer. Its slicing performance I'll get to later on, but it is totally fine for doing any sort of basic cut that you're going to be after. It still is VG10, which I wouldn't ever put in the good category, but it is certainly fine. Absolutely fine. This knife is a little pricey. It's 170 Australian dollars I paid, but that's mainly for the titanium. I think they sell a G10 version for a bit cheaper, and then they sell a carbon fiber version for a bit more money. So there you go. But I think you're mainly paying for like the design, the titanium, the IKBS, just the general. You've got a Burnley Kwaiken sort of factor. I think steel is. I wouldn't want it to be any weaker. Then it would start to be actually a firm negative, but it's fine, I guess, is what you'd say. So yeah. I don't know, there's a lot that I've sort of middled about with this blade. It's a little bit awkward to use and carry. So I'll sort of get into whether you call these negatives or whether this is just my personal weirdness or funk coming through. There is some stuff that I find hard to describe and hard to quantify about this knife. And I'll sort of class these as sort of like just the things that, just some commentary, things you need to know, neither good nor bad. First of all, it's 110 grams, so it actually doesn't weigh any more than the Spyderco Spidey Chef, but it feels really dense, and it's all weighted in the handle. The blade is quite light, and the handle is just full of steel and titanium, and it is so handle heavy. It just almost feels not difficult to wield, but less fun and less comfortable to wield than most of my other knives. It's like a little heavy stick that you carry with a little blade poking out of it. I don't know, it's tricky, and it's just how I've sort of come to feel about it. I can't help it. It's certainly something I'm going to bring up though. Another thing, just with the wieldliness of the thing, I just feel like the tip, it being higher, maybe too high or something, higher than the spine of the knife and the into the handle, I feel like the tip is almost not particularly intuitive to use and to steer around. Funny, I know, and it's probably just me randomly like using it for too long or thinking too hard about it or something. I just don't know. There's just a couple of little things that I wouldn't really call as negatives because I can't say these experiences are going to be universal, but just kind of how I feel, just a little bit heavy and a bit sort of awkward to use or something about it. And if you have not got this experience whatsoever, then for sure, I'm certainly not listing it as something that you're all going to feel, but it's just kind of how I've come around to thinking. I'll get into things that I actually don't like about the knife next though. So the one thing that I'm not super stoked on is the lock accessibility. It's not particularly a fun knife to lock and unlock. You sort of just need to really squish your hand in there and force that little liner across. The lockup is fine. The general construction and build quality is fine. I should have listed that on the goods. In fact, it is a pretty well-made Boker knife. I've not particularly had a huge amount of experience with Boker's folding pocket knives. You hear mixed accounts, and this one is certainly well put together, well centered, everything about it is fine. But yes, the lockup, which is I guess a design or construction choice, is a bit annoying to access there. So that's probably the thing I like the least about it. That's actually like a surely that's a pretty agreeable thing. The flipper tab as well, it does flip fine, but it's a little bit stubby. And I know the stubbiness is, part of getting that low profile size and that cool little silhouette going on. But I wouldn't have minded if they'd made this jimping here just a little bit more aggressive. Other flipping knives, so say this line still, that has no jimping on it either, but you see it's a real catch point, whereas this is like a sloped down point, if you see that there. So while this knife, I would say, doesn't need jimping to flip happily, this one could use a little bit more aggressive stuff, because it's got some very sort of shallow jimping cut out, but it's just not quite enough. And thirdly, I'm just not super stoked on it in the pocket. It is kind of, it's small, it's low profile, and that's great. It's just a little bit too much sticking out, and it's quite a little eye-catching thing. These silver little eyes on the clip, this sort of big triangle on the head, just cool looking for sure. Just a bit eye-catching. I'm just not super stoked on how it looks in the pocket. But the main thing that this knife, I'm not super thrilled about, is when you do slicing, it's just falling behind a little bit in terms of other EDC knives. And it's just simply because the grind and the stock is just a little bit thick still. Sure, it's thin behind the absolute cutting edge, no problems, thank you Hollow Grind. So it will certainly cut paper, cut envelopes, shave wood, whatever. Just when you're going into cutting food, which is what I'm spending most of my time with my EDC knives doing, cutting up apples for my kids and stuff, cutting up bananas, cutting up carrots, the stuff that kids graze on all day, it's just not as fun to slice with. I'll show you a demonstration with this knife and then with the Spyderco Delica. You see that this knife sort of, once the apple is sliced, the apple is kind of cracked and it sort of fluffs apart, whereas the Spyderco makes nice, clean, crisp cuts, because it is just a thinner blade stock, and there is no need to have this big, thick blade stock. It might be to help with blade weight to flip open, but you know what? I would rather a knife that didn't flip as well but cut great than a knife that flipped pretty good but didn't really slice food particularly cleanly. So that's kind of the main thing with the Kwaiken that I'm not super stoked on. I'd love to see a version with a thinner blade. In terms of other Kwaiken issues that I'm aware of, they seem to have gotten rid of the whole shakeout blade finger thing, because apparently the full-size Kwaiken, this is the mini, the full-size, the blade could tilt out in your pocket and people were cutting their fingers as they reached past it, but haven't had anything with this. It is a really solid, tight build. So yeah, overall, it's a great design. I'm not particularly sold on it. I'm not particularly super fond of it. Just the overall execution, just the lock-up and the grind, probably not as good as a lot of other everyday carry knives, and it is just a little bit too pricey to say just get one and try it. Maybe get the G10 one if that one is still around, but otherwise when you compare it to things like the Delica or like the other knives that I EDC, like the Spidey Chef, which is, Spidey Chef's probably another $50 over this, but the Delica's, about $70 less in Australia and money, of course. This is just going to actually perform so much better for you. This has probably got a bit more fun factor, being a flipper, whatnot, being stylish looking, low profile. This is a bit fucking gooby looking, of course, but it's just, I guess, practicality versus cool, let's call it. So yeah, the Boker Mini Kwaiken. It's a knife. It's not my favourite. It's not my least favourite. I don't hate it. Probably not going to stick around though, I must say. Alright guys, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for stopping by.